fact of the matter is that I'm not responsible for the death of Renee.
Carlos Hunter took my son's life from him, from myself, from my boys, and his children.
I remember looking past him to see Joseph crying over his mother's body.
He was the target that you wanted.
In Spring Hill, Tennessee, Jesse Cruz was arrested while in rehab for the death of 18-year-old Hannah Hick, whom he sold heroin laced with fentanyl. Her father believes that the presence of fentanyl elevates the crime to murder rather than a mere drug charge. He has been relentless in his pursuit of the maximum sentence for Cruz.
The Bible tells us to forgive. I'm trying, but I'm not there yet.
Cruz was charged with second-degree murder, reckless homicide, and the sale of narcotics. Despite his not guilty plea, his attorney's press release revealing a plea deal angered the judge. As a result, the judge rejected the plea deal and sentenced Cruz to 14 years in prison.
A press release about a case involving horrendous facts of someone selling fentanyl-laced heroin, who obviously this girl has a family. And apparently no thought was given to the impact of that press release on the family.
A Rochester teen, Anthony Allen, learned his fate for beating a group home counselor to death in Lockport. Before being taken to prison, Allen made shocking remarks directed at the judge. His statement stunned everyone in the courtroom, including the victim's family. Although his attorney had advised him against reading the statement, Allen chose to do so.
I'm pretty sure you have been waiting to be able to hold someone responsible since day one, but the fact of the matter is that I'm not responsible for the death of Renee.
Anthony Allen did not deny his involvement in the death of Renee Greco, but claimed he wasn't the one who physically assaulted the Lockport Group home worker. Before being sentenced, he directed his anger toward Greco's family and lashed out at Niagara County Court Judge Sarah Speraza.
You disgrace the title honorable, and you don't deserve to have it in front of your name.
Allen's shocking remarks were delivered as he read a prepared statement despite his attorney's advice against doing so. Minutes later, the judge referred to him as a monster.
I have very rarely in my life looked into the eyes of a monster. And from the first moment I saw Mr. Allen, he's one of three.
Allen was arrested in Buffalo 16 months ago, just hours after fleeing the Lockport home with another teen, Robert Thousand. Allen testified that the plan was initially intended to cover up a theft. His angry remarks at sentencing were related to a change in the indictment during the trial, which he believed led to his conviction. His attorney also had several heated exchanges with the judge over this issue.
I'm speaking towards the mitigation that he did not actually do the killing.
In the end, the judge described the evidence of Allen's guilt as overwhelming and sentenced him to 25 years to life in prison.
The only truly violent person in that home was Mr. Allen. Everyone was terrified of him.
After the court proceedings, Renee's family expressed both relief and anger.
His own speech showed what we knew all along, that his respect for women and authority is why he was sitting in that courtroom today.
He is cold-blooded. He is evil, and it is true, everybody, including staff, was scared of him.
The judge also revealed new information about Allen's violent past, which prosecutors hoped would provide insight into the true nature of the case. Allen's statement shocked many, leading some to question whether he had written it himself. More on that will be covered at 6. Meanwhile, the man who testified against Allen will return to court for sentencing unless the judge grants his motion to withdraw his plea to manslaughter. A woman was sentenced today for killing a father while driving under the influence. She received a sentence of 15 years to life in prison. Deborah King tried to delay her sentencing, but the attempt was unsuccessful and further outraged the victim's family. In a Salinas courtroom this Friday, Rianna Woods, the widow of the victim, confronted her husband's killer. She expressed her wish for the maximum sentence and her struggle to come to terms with the loss of her husband.
And I hope that she thinks about what she did and at some point accepts responsibility.
Jules Wood's wife, Adriana Woods, expressed disgust at Deborah King's attempts to avoid responsibility. King claimed insanity on 2 occasions, which delayed her trial by a year and nearly postponed her sentencing. On Friday, she attempted another tactic by sending a letter to the district attorney's office, claiming she had information about another crime and defendant, possibly to negotiate a lesser sentence. However, the judge rejected her letter.
Her history shows she's only thought about herself.
I don't think she ever wanted to face this day and hoped to put it off forever, but she couldn't.
She's never shown one shred of remorse except for herself.
Jules Wood's father told Deborah King he hoped she would suffer every single day in prison. King received a sentence of 15 years to life for killing Woods nearly 3 years ago while he was picking up his son from school. She was under the influence of prescription pain pills at the time. Ken Woods told King that she didn't understand true pain and vowed to be present at her parole hearings.
Well, she's got to serve at least 15 by this time already served. That means I'll be somewhere around 80 years old, and I'll be there if I'm still alive.
She just can't ever be free to get in another car. So that will be our goal.
Deborah King was sentenced to a mandatory 15 years to life in prison due to her history of 6 DUI convictions. Before sentencing, King's attorney had requested a new trial, but the judge rejected the motion. A former Raleigh County firefighter has been sentenced to up to 130 years in prison after pleading guilty to sexually assaulting a minor. On Monday, 36-year-old William Petri received the maximum sentence allowed by law for 3 charges: first-degree sexual assault and sexual assault by a person in a position of trust. Raleigh County prosecuting attorney Ben Hatfield requested the maximum sentence due to the explicit nature of the crimes, which occurred between March 2023 and July 2023.
Outline for the court, and if it makes the court uncomfortable, pardon my perspective in saying good.
Hatfield noted that the explicit messages and videos sent to the victim by Petri are likely to haunt her for the rest of her life. Meanwhile, the defense counsel requested that the court consider Petri's previous role in the community when deciding his sentence. Before his arrest, Petri was a firefighter who made headlines in March of last year for responding to a car wreck that tragically killed his wife and daughter.
Before his crimes, my client, Mr. Petri, was a member of high standing in his community. He served as a volunteer firefighter, and it appears that he was dedicated and selfless in that role. And I believe that says something about his character.
However, Raleigh County Circuit Court Judge Andrew Dimlick imposed the maximum sentence. He cited several factors that influenced his decision, including the severity of the crimes and their impact on the victim.
He was essentially tortured by youth. And this was not a one-time incident, which wouldn't have made it any better. But this is an incident that spanned several months. And I think the only reason it stopped was because you were arrested. All I have to go from is the pre-sentence report and your statements made about the remorse you feel, and I don't see it.
We spoke with Hatfield following Monday's proceedings. While the court's decision was in his favor, he acknowledged that no verdict or sentence can undo the harm that has been done.
Can turn back the clock.
I didn't make anything better today. What I did was I showed a little girl that the system will stand up for you when someone has done something wrong to you. Hopefully I showed her that it was not her fault, she had no part to play in it, and that she didn't ask for this in any way.
Petri's sentences will be served consecutively, totaling 37 to 130 years in prison. He will also be required to register as a sex offender for the rest of his life. If he is ever released from prison, he must undergo 50 years of post-release supervision. Prosecutors say Justin Evans pretended to be a police officer, using a fake badge to target his victims nearly 2 years ago. In December, a jury convicted him of kidnapping and rape. Evans learned his punishment, but he had a few things to say before that. Even at his sentencing, Evans remained defiant, blaming his December conviction on his public defender's illness.
I do know I have the right to a healthy lawyer to be able to make cognitive decisions and using his professional judgment.
In August 2021, prosecutors say Justin Evans was driving around Tampa with a fake police badge and lights.
The defendant pretended he was a police officer. He effectuated a traffic stop on a vehicle containing 3 women.
One of the women reported that Evans ordered her out of the car and falsely arrested her.
He told me that I was under arrest because he found marijuana in the car.
One of the women reported that Evans handcuffed her and put her in the back of his car before driving her to an apartment complex where he raped her. Additional charges were filed after another alleged victim appeared upon recognizing Evans' car from media reports. This incident was captured on surveillance video showing Evans in a dark-colored Chevy Malibu, pretending to be a police officer as he pulled over a woman near Brook Street North and Bush Boulevard East. The video shows him making her exit the vehicle and patting her down while her son remained inside. Although he left shortly afterward, the evidence from this case sealed Evans' fate. He was found guilty of sexual battery and kidnapping, and the judge sentenced him to life in prison. The prosecutor dropped the remaining charges from separate cases following his life sentence. A local woman received much unwanted attention after videos of her attempting to steal packages from a porch went viral. She became emotional in the courtroom.
841.
20-year-old Rianna Medina stopped crying when the judge allowed cameras to capture her arraignment today in Alhambra.
To deny the request for OR.
Rianna Medina quietly wept as the judge set her bail at $90,000, with her attorney blocking her from the camera angle. The man who filmed the incident, preferring to remain anonymous, said he caught Medina trying to steal 2 packages meant for his business. In court today, Medina pleaded not guilty to 3 felony charges: second-degree commercial burglary, identity theft, and grand theft of personal property. The video shows her attempting to take 2 packages containing $1,000 worth of items critical to the man's business.
I want to call the police on you.
Medina dropped the packages, stormed off, and reportedly gave the homeowner the finger. The Alhambra police said she then checked into a nearby motel under a false name, leading to the identity theft charge. In court today, prosecutors noted that Medina had a prior arrest in 2011, failed to appear in court, and was subsequently picked up on a warrant. Due to this history, the judge increased her bail from $25,000 to $90,000. Despite not successfully stealing the packages, the law considers her intent sufficient for the charges. Doug Griffith was sentenced this morning for felony DUI and illegally placing a tracking device under a Lehigh police officer's car. Chief investigative reporter Wendy Halloran had spent months uncovering Griffith's history of DUIs and how the system had failed to keep him off Utah's roads despite the dangers he posed. In a surprising turn, Judge Craig Powell disregarded adult probation and parole's pre-sentence report recommendations. He sentenced Griffith to prison, reflecting a tough stance on his repeated offenses. This decision marked a significant moment in holding Griffith accountable and addressing his long-standing disregard for the law.
Douglas Stewart Griffith, please come forward to the podium.
Doug Griffith faced the consequences in court this morning. His attorney, Joshua Larson, was present.
We're asking the court to follow the recommendations. Order 60 days jail, granting him credit for 49 served.
However, the state was very clear in opposing any jail time.
Basically, our position is that Mr. Griffith should go to prison.
Blood alcohol level 0.213, 4 times over the legal limit.
Utah County Attorney Ben Kearns played a 9-minute compilation of excerpts into Doug Griffith's repeated DUI arrests. One by one, witnesses for the state testified, including a woman who met Griffith online. She provided several examples of him drinking and driving in July.
Mr. Griffith sent a text stating he had been intoxicated on 7/17. He also stated he got sick from the drinking excessively.
Gail, representing Mothers Against Drunk Driving, or MADD, also testified.
We just asked the court that Mr. Griffith be held fully accountable under the law.
Russ Bean, his former best friend, also took the stand.
The more he is let off, the more emboldened he becomes.
Leslie Griffith, his soon-to-be ex-wife, also testified.
He continues to pass blame, minimize the risks and dangers, and find humor in his conduct.
Each of them provided reasons why he should serve a significant amount of time behind bars.
Dispute much of what has been stated by those who participated today.
Then, Doug Griffith had his turn to speak.
I am at the breaking point of, I don't know that jail's the answer, I know that treatment.
Judge Powell conducted a thorough investigation on his own, uncovering 17 additional traffic-related offenses and 1 more offense in the past decade.
I'm not able to conclude that Mr. Griffith has learned any lesson during any of these 18 different
The adult probation and parole pre-sentence recommendations suggested 60 days in jail, GPS tracking, and 30 months of 8 p.m. curfew probation. However, Judge Powell overrode these recommendations. He imposed a prison sentence of up to 5 years for the DUI and an additional year for the GPS tracking device. Judge Powell ordered these sentences to be served consecutively rather than concurrently.
He has endangered every citizen of Utah who is on the roads.
He described the tracking device installation as an insult to law enforcement.
It is simply another evil crime that has been committed against law enforcement in the state of Utah.
Afterward, Prosecutor Kearns spoke.
Society has been victimized by him, so I think it's the best outcome. I think to keep the people safe, absolutely a win for the state, for the people, for our office.
Leslie Griffith expressed her gratitude to Judge Powell.
I'm so thankful that he did all that work and went and did some of his own investigation. Thank you also for reporting this, because I think that there are laws that need to change.
Efforts are underway to transfer him to the Utah State Prison, as he was in custody at the Utah County Jail before sentencing. In Lynn, Massachusetts, 37-year-old Joshua Miller, who had been battling painkiller addiction, was working to turn his life around in a sober house. Tragically, in 2015, he was found unresponsive, having died from a fatal overdose. Investigations linked the drug to its dealer through phone conversations, which traced back to Carlos Hunter. It turned out that Hunter wasn't just a small-time dealer. Phone records revealed him boasting about the potency of his drugs. The challenge in court was deciding whether to sentence Hunter to the usual 3 to 5 years for involuntary manslaughter, or the prosecution's request for up to 15 years.
He was glib, successful, and actively promoted the drug trade, selling absolute poison.
Joshua Miller's mother made the decision even more challenging by touching everyone's hearts with her emotional breakdown, both in court and in interviews.
Carlos Hunter took my son's life from him, from myself, from my boys and his children, that hopefully one more family won't lose a child, a father, a brother to this.
Eventually, Hunter was charged with manslaughter and sentenced to 8 to 10 years in prison. Held without bail and under suicide watch at the Washington County Jail, 27-year-old Karina Roberts made her first court appearance. Investigators say she murdered 21-year-old Heather Snively, who was 8 months pregnant. Heather's mom revealed that her daughter had met Karina on Craigslist, thinking she would exchange baby clothes. The victim in this case is a young woman named Heather Snively. In the spring of 2009, Heather and her fiancé, Chris Pop, had recently moved to Beaverton, Oregon, hoping it would be a safe place to start their family. Heather was expecting their first child, a baby boy, whom they had already named John Stephen. The young couple was eagerly anticipating the arrival of their son. Heather and Chris started from scratch as first-time parents by gathering baby supplies. They needed to save as much money as possible for their future, so Heather took on the challenge of finding good deals and buying second-hand whenever possible. Heather often checked online to see if anyone was selling baby clothes they no longer needed, frequently visiting Craigslist. Through this website, she met many other soon-to-be moms and mothers who were done having children and had clothing and other supplies to sell or give away. While most of these women were kind and generous, one of the mothers Heather connected with was not. This woman was Karina Roberts. Karina, a 27-year-old mother of 2, had been in a relationship with a new partner for 5 years. During their time together, she had been pregnant once but miscarried, and since then, she hadn't been able to conceive again. Karina knew her partner wanted children of his own, and she feared that he might leave her if she couldn't provide that. This fear drove her to desperate measures. Determined to keep her partner, she devised a disturbingly evil plan to have a child, no matter the cost. To any normal person, Karina's plan would sound absolutely unhinged, yet she truly believed she could pull it off. Her plan began with befriending Heather, who was experiencing pregnancy for the first time, while Karina had already been through it twice. They started talking online and over the phone, building a connection. One day, Karina told her boyfriend she had some exciting news. She was pregnant again. However, this was a lie, part of her grand scheme to keep her boyfriend around. Karina didn't just tell her boyfriend she was pregnant, she told everyone around her. She wanted everyone to know. Karina began displaying typical signs of pregnancy as time passed, convincing people that nothing was amiss. She gained weight, took prenatal vitamins, and watched numerous videos to prepare for the birth. She even started making some of her own baby clothes by hand. Meanwhile, she and Heather continued to talk and even met a couple of times in person. Some of Karina's neighbors would see her and Heather taking walks around the property as Heather's due date approached. Then came the tragic day of June 5th, 2009. It started out like any other day. Heather told Chris she was meeting up with Karina to exchange some baby clothes, excited about the upcoming birth of their child. She gathered up much of her supplies, kissed her fiancé goodbye, and headed off. Tragically, that would be the last time Chris would ever see Heather alive. On that particular day, Heather and Karina went shopping together. Afterward, they returned to Karina's place to sort through their gathered baby items. Shortly after arriving, Heather went to use Karina's restroom. This was the moment Karina decided to follow through with her evil plan. With little John Stephen expected any day now, she saw this as possibly her last chance. While Heather was still in the bathroom, Karina hurried to grab her weapon of choice, an extendable metal baton. Karina then burst into the bathroom and ambushed Heather, striking her repeatedly with the baton. She hit her in the head 15 times, but Heather was determined not to go down without a fight. She did her best to defend herself and her baby, struggling fiercely with Karina. Eventually, however, Karina overpowered her and knocked her unconscious.
His wife had apparently called his work and told him or had a message relayed to him that she had just delivered a baby at home, and so then he rushed home from work.
When Karina's boyfriend got home, he found her sitting in the bathtub with the water running. He immediately called 911 to get help for the baby, but the baby had already passed away. When paramedics arrived and took the baby to the hospital for examination, doctors quickly realized that this was not Karina's baby. How did they know this? They insisted on examining Karina, who had claimed she had just given birth. The examination revealed that she had not recently given birth, confirming their suspicions that the baby belonged to someone else. Although hesitant at first, Karina eventually agreed to be examined. As soon as the doctors examined her, they realized her tubes were tied, making it impossible for her to have given birth. Yet, she was trying to pass off the baby as her own. Detectives then went to Karina's home and discovered Heather's body. Karina was soon arrested and charged with Heather's murder. However, to everyone's shock, it was determined that she would probably not be charged for the death of John Stephen.
Friday, investigators say Roberts and her boyfriend called 911 saying she'd just given birth and the baby wasn't breathing. The baby and at the hospital, doctors determined Roberts was lying. Sheriff's deputies searched her home and found Heather Snively's body in a crawl space, her 8-month-old fetus missing from her body. And the district attorney now says Roberts may not be charged with the baby's.
Even though Heather was far along in her pregnancy and would have likely given birth to a healthy baby boy if not for what Karina did, it was not expected that the court would recognize John Stephen as a person. This legal distinction meant that Karina was not charged with his death.
In order to have a homicide, it has to be a living human being, so that is a central issue to what charges, if any, can be levied for the child.
So if the baby never took a breath outside the womb, it's not considered a living being?
Most likely that would be the case, yes.
Obviously, this stirred up quite a bit of controversy.
Case is certainly renewing the debate over how our state handles pregnancy-related violent crimes and how they're prosecuted. Anti-abortion groups have focused on personhood amendments in the past, which would have defined a fetus in the womb as a person. All attempts have failed, though, including the most recent in 2014, with more than 60% voting it down.
It ultimately came down to a judge's decision on whether Karina could be charged with John Stephen's murder or if she could at least be charged with kidnapping.
Prosecutors in this case were able to use a kidnapping theory to secure charges for 4 counts of aggravated murder. The defense had argued that wasn't applicable because the infant was unborn, but still a judge ended up upholding those charges in addition to 2 counts of first-degree robbery.
Ultimately, the judge ruled against the defense in favor of the prosecution, which was bad news for Karina. This ruling meant her situation became even more dire, with a good chance she could face the death penalty for her heinous crime. However, if she accepted a plea deal, the prosecutors would remove the death penalty from consideration. Karina decided to take the plea deal.
Life behind bars. That was the sentence handed down today to the Oregon woman accused of killing a Maryland mother for her unborn child. Karina Roberts pleaded guilty to Heather Snively last year and the baby from her stomach.
While in court, Karina kept her replies to the judge very brief and cried almost the entire time. She told the judge she wanted to take responsibility for her actions.
I'm taking responsibility because I am guilty.
Heather's family would have liked to see Karina receive the death penalty for what she did, but they believe that life without parole is the next best thing. This sentence means she will never be free again and won't be able to hurt anyone else.
I felt this was the best punishment for her for this situation because she won't ever get out.
Heather's fiance, Chris, lost the love of his life and his son all at once because of Karina's heartless actions.
You come out to a place for a fresh beginning and to have something so tragic happen with such good intentions.
In court, Chris took his time to deliver a victim impact statement detailing how Karina had destroyed his life and taken away everything that meant the most to him.
During the hearing, Chris directed his comments at Robert, saying, "I hope you remember what you did for the rest of your life." Snively's father, Kevin, said the entire family is deeply affected by the loss of his daughter and his unborn grandson.
I don't think there's a father in this world that can understand this except for a father that's lost a daughter and a grandson.
On March 10, 2020, in Idaho, Douglas Taylor, an admirer of Hitler, inexplicably embraced Hitler's ideology and ended up sacrificing his roommate Verlene in a manner so gruesome that it deeply disturbed the court. When a child is born into this society, they come into the world innocent. However, as they grow, some become entangled in complexities that transform them from human to inhuman.
While he was in school, he excelled in math and reading, music, track, and field. At age 11, the family returned to Idaho, again due to a change in the father's employment. Throughout these years, Doug's early 11 years, the father was unstable. Behavior would be similar to that would appear to be somebody suffering from bipolar disorder. However, that evidently was not diagnosed or treated according to mother. That caused some family stresses. However, Doug still managed to flourish and do well during that time. Now, the parents separated when Doug was 12. And the reason why I'm showing these photos is you can see a happy, healthy kid all through this. About this time, Doug's parents separated. He was 12. The irregularity of father's behaviors put the mother in fear of harm for herself and for her children. A protective order was granted on behalf of the mother, and the parents were separated for approximately 2 years. Now, in 2000, when Doug was 14, Doug's father committed suicide. And this is devastating to Doug and all the other members of the family. And at this point, Doug started struggling with depression. They placed him on medications for treatment. Other siblings who were adults or older also struggled with depression, and some later have developed bipolar disorder. This is Doug right after, for a school photo right after his father committed suicide. And you can see just the difference in his happiness level in his face, Your Honor. Doug graduated high school in 2006. His first severe struggles with mental health happened in 2008 at the age of 20. This is while Doug was working out of state on a security job. He called the family and managed to get home to Idaho. At that point, he was diagnosed with the onset of schizophrenia. He's 20 years old at that point. It is a common progression for time frame and diagnosis of that disorder. His first commitment for mental health purposes was that same year, 2008, in a Minidoka County case. Now, over the next few years, the schizophrenia deepened. He was taken into the hospitals multiple times. In a psychotic fugue, fearing his family, he fled to Canada, seeking religious asylum. This happened happened in September and lasted through November of 2009, so a year after his initial diagnosis of schizophrenia. He was finally released to return home. Now, over time, and I'm showing this because this is a list, the best list that I can cull of Mr. Taylor's hospitalizations. These are hospitalizations both through individual hospitals throughout central, west, and eastern Idaho, as well as civil commitment cases by different counties. And over time, he has been, the best I can tell is 29 that I can verify. The family thinks it's closer to 32 times. Almost always, he was struggling with voices in his head and compulsions to harm himself or to harm other persons. He almost always he checked himself into the hospital. So he went in voluntarily, asking for help. Throughout these 29 visits, 8 of those he was committed under county civil commitments. Throughout my investigation and defense of the case, Your Honor, I have gotten what I do believe to be all of the mental health records from Douglas with any hospital or commitment that he's had that are purely medical diagnosis documents. I have a stack of papers that are over a foot tall that's sitting on my shelf. I've printed half of the documentation that has been provided to me, Your Honor. It is extensive. It is long lasting. Now, it's important to note that the civil commitments that were done, the 8 of them that I can see, were done under the Idaho Code 66329. I know that our county does these. It's just the same as with most other counties, and I'm sure that the commitment criteria are very similar. And these are fairly standard questions. Does the person suffer from a mental illness? Does the mental illness pose a danger to the oneself or to others? Are they gravely disabled due to that mental illness?
At the time that this crime occurred, Hans was living over on 17th Street at Higbee in a home that was an extension of the Andres house. There he lived with a couple of roommates, one of which was the defendant. On March 10th of 2020, at approximately 10:30 p.m., law enforcement was dispatched to that residence based upon a report. Officer Ricard with the Idaho Falls Police Department was the first to respond. He contacted one of the roommates, Mr. Medina, upon arrival, and then entered the home. I think it's fair to say that Officer Ricard had no idea the situation that he was walking into. While searching the home, Officer Ricard found Hans in the kitchen, lying on his back in a massive pool of blood. Officer Ricard observed numerous wounds to the victim's body, as well as to his throat that had nearly and entirely been severed off. Mr. Medina witnessed some of this. He gave as much information as possible to the police that he could. Additional officers were dispatched, and a search began. And ultimately, the defendant was located near the Albertsons store on 17th Street, about 2 or 3/10 of a mile from the home. When the defendant was located, he was covered in blood. Law enforcement asked him where the knife was, which he indicated that he had dropped and left at the scene. EMS took Hans to the hospital, and he was declared upon arrival. An autopsy was completed in which they documented 17 to the victim's body. The main areas were his arms, his back, his chest, and stomach area. The autopsy additionally located 6 incised wounds on the victim's neck. Your Honor has been provided a couple of exhibits that we've admitted, one of which is the weapon itself. I think the court can see from that it is a somewhat smaller knife. would have taken a lot of effort and time for an individual like the defendant to inflict that much damage upon this victim. Additionally, the court can see the extensive wounds to the victim's body, all of which, Your Honor, are extremely aggravating factors in this case. The defendant at the time indicated reasons for doing this, reasons that we now know probably are not true. Something about the victim being a Nazi sympathizer, trying to start a cult. When law enforcement searched the residence, including the victim's home, there was no sorts of paraphernalia found of that nature. Additionally, speaking with collateral sources, there's nothing to indicate that he was any sort of white supremacist, Nazi sympathizer, or anything of that nature. He just seemed to be a kind, caring man who struggled himself with mental illness. He received disability for that and was trying to make a better life for himself. Your Honor, some things that are also aggravating to the state and concerning in this case is the defendant's penchant for violence. On page 3 of the pre-sentence investigation report, under the criminal history portion, bullet point 4, under minimal criminal history, indicates the defendant, while in custody at the Bonneville County Jail, has spent 75 days in max for attacking another inmate. He also, under bullet point 5, has previous violent behavior while in mental health facilities, feeling violent impulses. And additionally, Your Honor, the court has the statement from the defendant's mother where she talked about, while serving as his guardian, feeling in fear of her life based upon behaviors and comments from the defendant. What's also concerning, Your Honor, is at the time of this crime, in searching the defendant's effects, it was clear that he was non-compliant with his medications. And page 4 of the pre-sentence investigation outlines a history of non-compliance. Under the emotional and personal section, bullet point 3 and 4 talks about how the defendant was put on Celexa at age 14, which he took for about 6 months, but then he stopped taking that because he felt he didn't need to, that he had gotten over his depression. And then at age 20, he was put on some different medications, wasn't consistent in taking it, had some good years when taking, bad times when he didn't, and the defendant stated, "I'm more psychotic when I'm not taking my meds."
The chilling emptiness in the defendant's eyes at the verdict hinted at a troubled state of mind, a factor the judge considered when delivering the sentence.
Right before the state released him the last time, he was still homicidal. My mom and her husband both were in the hospital not to release him. And when they did release him, they put him in a home with very little oversight. One of my brother's main paranoias comes from reading too much Nietzsche. He often spoke of Nazi Germany. When I found out that the man he was from Germany, I was even more disheartened by the state. It would not have taken much to know that Douglas needed supervision and should never been placed with someone, or never been placed with a German. So these letters, your counsel have talked about your struggles with schizoaffective disorder and schizophrenia. And Mr. Gustavus, I believe, is correct when he talks about the 20 years old is a time when that onset occurs. Your mom also refers to the fact that Douglas was a robust, happy, and healthy baby and child, energetic, very social and friendly. When his father took his life by hanging, your demeanor changed drastically. No longer was he that confident, happy teenager, but he withdrew from society, friends, and family. By his late teens and since his life has been one of psychosis, paranoia, grandiose delusions, and demanding voices. That's why I talk about this is horrifically sad. It's horrifically sad for you and your family that they have been struggling with these issues. The court has the obligation of balancing out what to do in this case. The court has the obligation of reviewing this sentencing in light of the objectives of the Idaho Supreme Court adopting the course in the Supreme Court case of State versus Toohill. Of course, first and foremost obligation is the protection of society. I must see that society is protected. That's the court's main job. Second is deterrence of you and of others committing this type of crime. As indicated, it's a horrific crime that cannot be stood for in our society. I must see your rehabilitation and consider that, and must consider punishment or retribution for wrongdoing. Ultimately, in this case, and this is coming from the reports that were attached to the pre-sentence investigation report from the 1925-24 evaluations, where it talks about without some form of treatment, it's likely this individual will continue to struggle with symptoms and problems may increase. In your case, you were experimenting with going off your medications. You had been taught to, when you were having those homicidal thoughts, to check yourself into the hospital. You chose not to. I recognize the long history of doing that. Counsel talks about 29 times, the family thinks over 30 times. But this time you chose not to do it. You chose not to check yourself in, but instead you chose to purchase a knife. You chose to someone, and that someone happened to be your roommate. Sadly, it appeared to be a roommate that you got along with. It just became such that he was the target that you wanted. So based on all these factors and considering the criteria of where we are, it's going to be the judgment of this court to be sentenced to the custody of the Idaho Department of Corrections as follows. For a life sentence with a minimum term of 27 years, it will need to be served. In order this run to concur with anything else, in order to fine in this case of $5,000, standard court costs of payments into the Victims Relief Fund, restitution in the amount of $3,155 to be paid to crime victims compensation, reimbursement of the county for public defender service in the amount of $500. In order that you be given credit for time served in this matter, and also order that certainly you have all access to treatment facilities available by the Idaho Department of Corrections. Let me advise you have the right to appeal the Idaho Supreme Court for this judgment of conviction. You have a right to be represented by an attorney in that appeal. If you cannot afford one, it will be appointed for you public expense. However, you only have 42 days from today's date to appeal that. You also may have rights under Idaho Criminal Rule 35 if you feel the sentence was illegal or unduly harsh. You have 120 days for that. You also may have rights under the Idaho Uniform Post-Conviction Relief Act. Such an action must be filed within 1 year from the date that your right to appeal expires. Any questions about those rights, please consult your attorney. You have it advised. The court will attach the exhibits to the pre-sentence investigation report. Pursuant to the rules, those will be sealed. Anything else at this time, Mr. Chairman?
Nothing from the state, Your Honor. Thank you.
Mr. Gusky. Sorry, Your Honor. Thank you.
Every relationship has its issues, but some issues turn violent. Unfortunately, our next case falls into this category.
Can you please tell the jury how and when you met them?
Well, I actually met the kids first through Joseph. I have my niece.
The officer's job was to question the suspect and determine what happened that day.
Oh, paying my taxes and everything.
From the business standpoint?
Yes, ma'am.
And have you previously been convicted of a felony crime?
Yes, ma'am, I have.
How many times?
2 times.
You've heard all the evidence about Ashley Rucker and Lisa Rucker sitting here this week, correct?
Yes, ma'am, I have.
Can you please tell the jury how and when you met them?
Well, I actually met the kids first through Joseph. I have my niece. I was done working one day. I was out. When I get done working in the evenings, I clean up my trailer and get my equipment ready for the next day to work. And while I'm doing that, I have my niece driving more around in the yard. She just like a rabbit. And he came running up and he was hiding in the bushes. And I seen him and I was like, hey man, I showed him how to ride the other one. So I had them out there, and that's how I met him. And then the sisters came after the fact because that was their grandma's house while they was across the street from where I was.
Okay, so they lived close to you at the time?
No, ma'am. The grandma was across the street, so they seen the grandma.
Understood. Okay, so did you eventually form a relationship with Ashley Rucker?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
Okay. And did you live together at times?
We have 4 or 5 houses.
And did your son Joseph live with you as well?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you love Ashley?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
Did you think she loved you?
I believe so.
So how was your relationship? Was it always good, rocky? How would you characterize it?
It started out great. I never had a woman take me to a hotel room or take me on a cruise to the Bahamas.
How long were you guys together?
I think 3 or 4 years.
And so you said at first it was good. After that, how would you characterize it?
I mean, it kind of started turning around a little bit.
Rocky? Is that fair to say?
Yes, ma'am.
Would you guys break up often? Was it on and off, or did you just stay together the whole time?
Sometimes.
So there were times that you were not living together, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And why wouldn't you be living together at that time?
You know, depending on the situation.
Would you be broken up in all likelihood?
There was times, yes, ma'am.
And what was your relationship with your son Joseph like?
I thought it was great.
Did you love him?
Of course I did, like he was mine.
Was Joseph's father in the picture much at the time?
No, ma'am.
So did you, did you take that kind of role with him, or what kind of relationship formed with Joseph as a result of that?
I'm sorry. You said.
And that's a long, convoluted question. I'm sorry. So, what kind of relationship did you form with Joseph?
You know, I try to teach him how to drive everything that I want. I try to take him fishing.
And so Joseph was included in a lot of the things that you did?
Yes, ma'am. Anything he was interested in.
And so he was also included in a lot of things you and Ashley did together?
Of course.
So what was your relationship with Lisa Rucker?
Lisa was, it was what it was. She came along with the sister. Sometimes she had problems.
Did she live with you?
Yes, ma'am. Sometimes in a few places.
So did she live with you and Ashley at all the places, or just some of them?
Not just a few. She would stay. Then, you know, she'd get another boyfriend or something.
When Lisa Rucker did live with you and Ashley, did her son Colton live with you as well?
Yes, ma'am, we did.
And did you have a similar relationship with Colton that you did with Joseph?
I did.
So I want to move to the day of the incident. The shooting involved in this case took place in the early morning hours of October 31st. And on that day, you were living with Lisa, Ashley, and her sons, correct?
Yeah, I wouldn't stay there. I stayed there at night time.
So you were not living there. Correct me, please.
Yeah, I just stayed there at nights, ma'am.
Okay. Why were you not living there at the time?
It was just best for us the way we had it worked out.
So where were you living?
I had another place.
Halloween used to be a joyous holiday spent with Ashley and Joseph. However, now I spend it mourning the loss of family. On Halloween 2017, Chad took the last person I had left that loved me unconditionally, that would support me and protect me. As a result of that, Chad also took my nephew from me, causing grief, sorrow, and heartache in every aspect. Ashley was a lover and she loved hard. She was also a fighter and fought for what she believed in. She was someone who never gave up easy. She always worked hard for what she wanted. She loved her family deeply and was always there for everyone. I remember as children how Ashley and I were so close in age that we would argue and fight over materialistic things, and our mother used to tell us that one day we would appreciate each other more. And she was so right. As we grew into adults, we were there for each other like only sisters could be. Anytime, day or night, good advice, bad decisions, and hard times, we always had each other. Until Chad changed that. Chad turned our world upside down in a matter of minutes. A split-second decision that changed so many lives. I spent 3 years scared of the world, scared of what could happen. 3 years where I barely went outside at night, where I couldn't sleep at night. 3 years of battling my head because I had nearly lost my life and it happened so fast. I remember that night so clearly, but for the life of me, I cannot seem to begin to understand why he chose that choice that night. Chad took a mother, sister, friend, aunt, and not only took her life, but also left her her own child and nephew to find. I remember hearing my son beg me not to, and as I tried to tell him I was okay, which I was far from, I remember looking past him to see Joseph crying over his mother's body. In that moment, I had no idea I had hoped that she too was in and out of consciousness like I was. I spent 5 years listening to stories spread and rumors come about. I spent 5 years battling myself and my demons because now I am alone. Alone because Chad took the last person that I could go to for advice, for help, for understanding, for love. I spend the holidays alone because Chad took the last family I have left. And now all I have are pictures. Do you know what it's like to spend every holiday alone without any family to turn to for help? Every difficult trial I've faced, I've had to do alone. I spend countless nights wondering how my nephew must feel to never truly get to know his mother, losing his mom and the only family he's ever known as a result. So many days I've cried and just begged for this all to be a nightmare. So many days I've wanted my phone to ring and look down and see Ashley's name. So many times I sit in a puddle of my own tears wanting to hear my sister's voice, wondering why her, why me. Being strong is hard, being brave is difficult, because at some point it all has to end. And at the end of it all, there is no superhuman, there is no explanation, and there is no apology. There is only pain and heartache. My sister will never get to watch her son grow into an adult. She will never watch him marry, have children, and live a life. Ashley also misses out on that with my oldest son, whom she loved like her own. She also never got the chance to meet her newest nephew and love him the way only an aunt could. Ashley will never get to be my maid of honor. She will never have the chance to smash another cake in someone's face as she did at every birthday. I'll never get to hear her speak, see, or touch my sister again. I forever must live with that night being the last time I ever saw her. Being the person I am and how I was raised, I tried to be compassionate and understanding to every situation I've ever been faced with in life.
All right, then Mr. Absher, will come forward for sentencing, sir.
All
Hi, Mr. Absher. I, of course, sat through the week-long trial in your case. I also have listened today to the testimony of witnesses, listened to some letters that were read into the record, and have considered the arguments of both of the attorneys. Let me say just a couple words before I impose sentence here. I've been on the bench now approximately 10 years, and I have sat through a variety of different kinds of trials in a variety of different facts and circumstances. But I look at each case and each person individually. And the facts and circumstances of this case were by all accounts horrifying. The fact that this happened in front of these two young children who are forever going to be traumatized is a fact that I'm not taking lightly. And to me, in this case, is an aggravating factor. I don't think Ms. Rucker and your family will ever have closure. I don't expect you to, but hopefully with today's sentencing, there will be some sense of closure. And I certainly hope and encourage, if your son Colton and if Joseph in New Jersey is undergoing counseling and therapy for this event, that they certainly continue to do so in the hopes of perhaps leading as normal a life as they can in the future, especially Joseph without his mother. And I certainly hope for all of you that the good memories, the wonderful memories that you have of Ashley can provide you at least some comfort in your grief as you go forward with your life from this point forward. But no sentence I impose today is ever going to bring her back or will ever, I suspect, satisfy anybody. But I will impose the sentence I think is appropriate and that is within the bounds of the law. So with that, Mr. Absher, as to counts 1 through 3, the jury having found you guilty on each of counts 1 and 2, and you having pled guilty, a plea I accepted. As to count 3, I'm now going to adjudicate you guilty of each of those 3 counts. On count 1, I will sentence you, as the law requires me to mandatory life in prison with no possibility of parole. On count 2, I'm going to sentence you to life in prison. As required, well, not as required, but I feel as appropriate in this matter. As to count 3, I will sentence you to 15 years in prison with the required 3-year minimum mandatory. You will get credit for the 1,855 days that you have already served. Count 3 will run concurrent to count 1 and 2, but count 1 and 2 will run consecutively with each other. That is, count 1, then count 2, and count 3 will run concurrent to count 2, or 1, regardless. I will impose mandatory felony court costs of $518. There's a $150 attorney fee lien. Is there any restitution that I must order, or do I need to reserve jurisdiction?
I would ask you to reserve jurisdiction, Your Honor. And I think just also for record purposes for count 1, would that include also the mandatory life in the 10-20 life?
10-20 life, both on count 1 and on count 2.
Oh, okay, yes,
so the jury found that the defendant actually possessed and discharged a firearm with death or great bodily harm.
Thank you, Your Honor.
So those minimum mandatories are applicable based on the jury's findings. I believe that is all. Do you understand your sentences?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, you do maintain the right to appeal. Of course, both the judgments and the sentences. You must do so by filing a notice of appeal within the time so designated to the clerk of court. Would you like an attorney appointed to represent you on appeal?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, then at this time I'll appoint an attorney for purposes of appeal. And that, sir, will conclude this matter today. Thank you very much.
Big thanks to our viewers for joining the courtroom journey with us. Your interest in the stories of justice is what keeps our channel alive.